As you know, on Sunday night or Monday morning of every week, we post a new expository semiotics explaining why we would choose which lectionary readings. But in these readings, our dream is, and our desire is, to help you read the signs and fondle the details and spot the seminal metaphors, the condensed signs and the stories that are key for preaching to a digital culture. So strap on your seatbelt and join us as we prospect our passages for today. This is the vlog for the 28th of June, 2020, and we have some very interesting, challenging, as always, texts for today. But just to mention, Psalm 113, if anyone wants to use that as your launching pad, it's a great psalm. Remember, these psalms are always supposed to be sung, so they're chanted. You never read a psalm and if you're good Hebrew. But this image of God who is enthroned on high, but who stoops down, who comes down, stoops down, drops down to interact with humanity. And so the great come down, the incarnation, the great come down, we're going to be talking about that a little later. But it's a great image of who God is. And he raises the poor, but he comes down, not to join the rich and the powerful, but who stoops down to earth and raises the poor from the dust, lifts the needy from the ash heap, sets them with princes, and with princes of their people he settles the barren woman in her home as a happy mother of children. God doesn't just come down to have a good time with us. There's a mission here, and so it's a great psalm. The two I want to spend a little time with, though, I'm going to do first the gospel reading, which is Matthew 10, and I'm just going to read all the verses here, 40 to 42, because it's at the heart of what we're talking about. He who receives you receives me, and he who receives me receives the one who sent me. Anyone who receives a prophet, because he's a prophet, will receive a prophet's reward. And anyone who receives a righteous man, because he is a righteous man, will receive a righteous man's reward. And if anyone gives a cup of cold water to one of these little ones, because he is my disciple, I will tell you the truth, he will certainly not lose his reward. We're talking about hospitality today, and in many ways, every sermon really ought to be about hospitality in some form. It's at the very heart of the gospel. What does it mean to have a hospitable heart, a heart that is open to others, to strangers, to new things, a hospitality to life and to love, and the essence of the gospel is this hospitality. In fact, the centerpiece doctrine for Eastern Orthodoxy is the incarnation, and the incarnation is the very definition of hospitality as God, divine hospitality, in which God makes the fractured world a place for divine habitation. And that's what we have here in Psalm 1. God stoops down. God inhabits our space with us and is hospitable to us. And the divine hosts us with divine presence, with transcendence. And so the very essence of the incarnation is the welcoming of the human and all of our brokenness and all of our contingency and all of our failures. We are hosted by God and welcomed by God into the divine presence. I love this phrase. When you think about it, we always think about it basically with Christmas or sometimes with Easter, but the heavenly hosts. And we have these angels singing. That's a whole other story. There's only one time in the whole Bible that you can actually say that it says the angel sang. Every other time it says the angel said, but I made you enough angry last week. We're not going to do it again. So we're going to keep moving here. But the heavenly host, that host of heaven, can we be hosts of heaven? I mean, Can we think, when we think about the heavenly host, can we be hosts? Can we be heavenly hosts of heaven? We're hosts in our home, but we're supposed to host heaven in our home. So be a heavenly host. Host heaven in your home. Can we hear heaven not just as a location above and beyond us, but as a living presence and a lifestyle among us and within us and between us? Can we host heaven in our home? And you all know the importance of home and the centerpiece of the table to home, and you can't host without the table. The other side of being a good host, though, is you got to learn how to be a good guest. And many times when we focus on I'm a good host, but we're also not very good guests. We don't know how to be gracious guests and how to respond Eucharistically, thankfully, to the heavenly hosts and to the hosts of heaven. So the key is to be a good guest. Now, I love this text. This, and we're going to talk about what is the prophet's reward. Did you catch that? You'll get a prophet's reward. I love this text because in early colonial America, now I don't know the European story as well as the American story, but in the early days, we Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterians, we all have what were called circuit riders. And these circuit riders just rode the circuit. I mean, it's a wonderful phrase. 18th century, 19th century phrase is really current, a circuit. I mean, what we've been doing during this pandemic is we've been riding circuits. I mean, Zooming is one big circuit that we've been riding. So we're circuit riders. And these circuit riders, they would go to a village, and many times the first educated person in that new settlement, whether the settlement is a fort, whether it's a couple of houses out in the in a holler, in a mountain cliff, where now there are cities today, but back then there were just a couple of houses. But the first one to visit and to conduct worship were these circuit riders. But when they came to a new settlement where there was some houses forming, the question they would ask is there a prophet's chamber around? Is there a prophet's chamber around? And a prophet's chamber had a technical meaning. It was the name of a room or a set of rooms in a home that a Christian would dedicate to hosting traveling preachers and colporteurs, the ones who were bringing books, and missionaries. And so they would dedicate a little space in their house, a room, a couple rooms, as prophets' chambers. And so the prophet would then go to that house and say, do you have any room for me? I heard you had a prophet's chamber here. Isn't that a wonderful phrase, a prophet's chamber? Now here's the key, the prophet's reward. When that prophet left that house, the last thing he would do is gather the family for prayer and offer a blessing on that home. It would be a blessing that was specific to that home because he knew that home, because he had stayed there. And so he would look at what were the issues of that home, the problems in that home, and that final blessing. That's the prophet's reward. You're rewarded for your hospitality with a blessing. We think of rewards today. Where's my lottery winning? No. The best rewards are these blessings. And that's why Jesus says, Jesus, they didn't call it prophets' chambers then, but if they fail to receive you, remember, if they won't have any part of hosting you in any way, just shake the dust off your feet. In other words, don't give them a prophet's reward. Don't give them a blessing. Just shake. And I've been right in the middle of sermons and I've started shaking too, because I call it my sacrament of failure, because not everybody's going to receive you. Not everybody's going to like you. And so you just shake the dust, but you keep moving. You keep moving. You go find another prophet's chamber. So this whole issue of hospitality. Now, we used to communicate as much with signs as we did with speech. And so in Asian cultures, the symbol of a family that was dedicated to extending hospitality to everyone was a frog. In Asian cultures, a frog is a symbol of hospitality. So outside a home, they would have a frog, maybe a little pond where the frog would be. But when you saw that frog in that pond, and then when you walked in, if you saw another frog, it was a double. This is really a home that's dedicated to hospitality. So in Asian cultures, it was the frog. In Western cultures, when the pineapple was discovered, and you didn't get the pineapple right away, but pineapple was such a rare commodity. They had whole pineapple parties where the whole big feature would be the pineapple. Everybody would gather around the pineapple and look at the pineapple. And there was a pine, could look like a pine cone, but it had the taste of it was sweet as an apple. So it's a pine apple, all right. And so that was kind of the if you could get a pineapple, if you could taste a pineapple in your life, if you could have a pineapple. So the symbol of hospitality from the time in the 17th, 18th century when they started bringing back this fruit that Western cultures never seen before, the pineapple became the symbol of hospitality. So often, all right, in the guest room, there would be what was called pineapple poster beds. And these pineapple poster beds would have pineapples, literally pineapples, that were kind of just set into the four posters. And when you extended your hospitality in the prophet's chamber, or any guest, but they communicated that maybe it's time for you to think about leaving by when you got to your room and there was one pineapple missing. It was a sign. It's time for you to think about going. Now, if you got to your room and there were two pineapples missing, it meant you got about 3 days, and then it's over. If you came to your room and you had 3 pineapples missing, it's 24 hours you were calling the police. Now, the early Christians also, because some people will stay. You've all had friends like this. You invite them to come, and the next thing you know, they're there a week, and then another 10 days, and then what do we do? How do we handle this? So the early Christians had this too. There's an old saying that you can invite someone to lunch and they stay for 2 years. Now, part of hospitality is always ask your guests to stay a little longer, but the guest's job is not to be agreeable. Your guest's job is to be a good guest. Is, oh, thank you so much, but we really need. And when you start talking about, stay a little longer, that's a sign that they're really asking you to. You might want to think about leaving, and if they didn't have a pineapple poster, in the Didache, the teaching of the 12 apostles, which is late 1st century, early 2nd century, they were really strict with these visiting prophets, and because they said they had a 2-night rule. And in the Didache, if you took advantage of free room and board for more than 2 nights, this is Didache 11, 4-6, you're a false prophet. Wow. How many times have I violated that rule? And stayed for more than 2 nights. But that's kind of that's the hardest rule. But I wanted to give you this wonderful poem from my tradition, the Welsh, Celtic, Irish tradition, and it's a Gaelic rune of hospitality from early Christian spirituality in the Celtic tradition. So, I saw a stranger yestreen. I put food in the eating place, drink in the drinking place, music in the listening place, And in the sacred name of the triune, he blessed myself and my house. That's the prophet's reward. My cattle and my dear ones, and the lark said in her song, often, 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 goes the Christ in the stranger's skies. So a reminder that when we reach out in hospitality to prophets, to strangers, we're doing this. And it's Christ in guise or disguise. In Arab cultures, when you say you're welcome, they don't take away pineapples. They start filling up your cup to the brim and over. As a sign, it's time for you to go. My cup is full of you. Is where that comes from. So it's pineapple in U.S., coffee in Arab cultures, frog in Asian cultures. The concern that I have about this, and we could spend a whole bunch of time on this. We are inviting people into our space. Xenophilia, love of strangers, and Christian is a xenophiliac. We love strangers. We don't want strangers to ever be strange. And that's the whole point of the Psalm 113. But the ultimate in hospitality is not to invite people into your space, but as God did through Jesus, to enter into their space, to go into their space and enter it and learn their way of being a human and doing life and being taught by them and being hospitable to their customs and their traditions, and then in the midst of that, being Jesus and doing Jesus and seeing Jesus in the midst of that. So just a warning here that real stranger loving would not be bringing them to our space, but going into their space, entering their space, their turf, journeying with them, serving them, helping them, and letting them see, I don't want hesitate to use this word, but kind of an invasion of love as we invade their space and be hospitable to their culture. You know, I think you're gonna have to wait. I was going to talk about sin today, but I think we've really said enough, and I don't think I've got enough time to really deal with sin. One of the hardest things. So I'm going to find a way to next week. I'm going to try and help you. How do you communicate sin to a culture that has no concept of sin? In the First and Second Testaments, in Hebrew and Greek, you cannot escape over 1,500 references to sin. 1,500. So you can't enter the Jewish Christian story without an understanding of sin. So how do we communicate and connect with a culture? And we just can't say, oh, let's just forget about it. And the reason why is Romans 6:23 was part of our reading today. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus. So I'm sure next week we will have sin somewhere in our readings. So I'm going to build on this Romans 6. And next week we're going to deal with sin. And how do you connect to a culture that has no understanding that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God? That the best that I would, I do not, and the evil that I would not, I do, as Paul said. I will to do good, but I do evil, Ovid said. Even the pagan philosophers understood this, and we live in a culture where... And by the way, this was the biggest rap on Jesus. He extended hospitality, brought to his table sinners. And he didn't say to them before he would eat with them, repent. Understand that I am the Messiah. You need to get on your knees. He just enjoyed even as they were sinning, he just loved people. And he loved people, and he loved to eat with people. He eats with lepers and sinners. and prostitutes, and Jesus will eat with anybody. Wow. And they meant it as a slam. So the key critique of Jesus among the Pharisees and the religious establishment is that he did not have a significant enough doctrine of sin and an understanding of sin. So we're going to, next week, deal with why he didn't and what it meant that he didn't and why we shouldn't either, but we have to take sin seriously. So hospitality. Thank you for being hospitable to me. Semiotics is the art of angling, of turning things askew, upside down, inside out, cattywampus, sunny side up, over easy, scrambled, hard-boiled. We hope you enjoyed today's journey, but always remember, it's more important you prepare the preacher than you prepare the sermon.